Welcome to Conversations with Chuck Hester, a weekly podcast designed to inform and entertain you and introduce you to some really interesting and inspiring people. I'm your host, Chuck Hester, and today's guest is Wendy Marx. And Wendy is the best-selling author, branding expert, and career coach. She's been a social worker, journalist, marketer, and a PR agency owner. Now in her fifth reinvention, she is a branding and reinvention coach for people 50 plus at her company, Thriving at 50. Wendy has transformed hundreds of companies and individuals, taking them from anonymity to thought leaders. And committed to making 2021 a year of renewal, she will soon be launching a live show on LinkedIn called Renewal at 50 Plus to create a community dedicated to newfound power, resilience, and renewal. Wendy, welcome to Conversations with Chuck Hester.
Oh, well, I'm delighted to be here, Chuck. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, we were talking off air. The reinventors were originally something that was occurring basically back when social media was becoming prominent. And folks who, and as you as a former PR agency person can appreciate this as well, learning social media and being able to do that. But, I'm fascinated because I've listed out social worker, journalist, marketer, PR agency owner. Walk us through, for my audience, that journey. How did that all start, and how did you get to where you are now?
I'd be happy to, Chuck. I like to say that I'm the poster child for reinvention and rebranding. I also sometimes call myself Trendy Wendy because I was a social worker when that was popular. I then went into journalism when that became popular. But there is some logic to my madness. I originally, after I was a social worker, decided that I wanted to use my writing talents. I had always loved to write and was able to actually be paid to go back to school. I got a fellowship to go to Columbia, and I wrote my master's thesis, which I was paid for that, on housing problems of poor elderly in New York. So I was actually able to use some of my social work skills in that because originally as a social worker, I worked at a major geriatric center in New York City. And what I found in my different reinventions is that each, just like that one, has served as a stepping stone. So now, for example, in my fifth reinvention, and along the way, I'll also add that I acquired 3 master's degrees. So
Wow.
I joke about that, Chuck, that I could make good money selling them on the black market. So now in my fifth one as a career coach and branding expert, I'm really utilizing all of my skills. I have my psychological savvy from my years as a social worker, my writing skills from being a newspaper reporter and freelance writer, my marketing and PR skills from being having a PR agency. And I also, prior to the PR agency, I worked as a marketer for some large corporations. So I'm combining them all and offering a multidisciplinary approach to my clients in my coaching business. A lot of people, when they coach, they typically have an HR background, which is terrific, but I can offer some differentiation with all of the experience that I've had.
Well, and we've talked about this a little bit, and I'll put it up for you for folks now. But your website, thriving50plus.com, walk us through, what you offer, because I know there's basically, I believe, if I get this correct, there's 3 different areas where you can be helpful in regards to that. But talk about the programs that you've got, because we've got group coaching, one-on-one coaching, and the video courses. But explain, my favorite question I always have for my guest is, who's your client? Who are you trying to reach, and how are you helping them?
I'm reaching people who are 50 plus who are just not sure what they want to do next. And what I found is that a lot of people, either they want to work or because of the economy are forced to work later in life than they thought they would. And they have a lot of talents and experience, but they're not sure how to combine all of that and do something else. And what I do for my clients is, one, help them get unstuck, figure out what to do next, and then, very importantly, how to brand and position them for this next act. So that is coming up with the right messaging, the right story that they want to tell about themselves, and help them move to this new place that they want to be. And I can do that either through individual coaching, group coaching, and I also have created a video course that's about reinventing. I call it How to Reinvent Yourself in a Crisis.
So, well, and perfect timing for this. I mean, how long have you been doing Thriving at 50 plus?
I started this when my book came out. And I'm kind of an exemplar of how to do this, in a sense, because when my book came out in April, also called Thriving at 50 plus, that was just when the pandemic was heading up, and I was supposed to have a big launch party and a lot of hoopla. And instead, here I am smacked with this pandemic. And I still plowed ahead, launched my website, and launched my business. I'm going to be honest with you, Chuck, and your audience, that it hasn't been easy to begin, for, I think, just because of the pandemic, and also with the changes that I was going through, having run a PR business, and a successful one, for so many years. Here I'm suddenly doing something new, dealing with all these external realities that made things difficult. And I suddenly felt frozen in place. I literally couldn't get off first base for a time. And I was going through the motions. I did things, but I just didn't feel where I wanted to be. And I suddenly said to myself, I've had enough of this. And I'm ready to move forward. And I actually hired a marketing coach for myself. Coaches need coaches too. And I joke that the person that I hired, I wanted somebody to give me a swift kick in the ass. And that's what I got. And I now am feeling much more positive. I'm in a much better spot, and just excited about things that I'm doing. And I'm especially excited about the show that you had mentioned, called Renewal at 50 plus.
Yeah, sounds like perfect timing. We talk about this on the show on a regular basis. My phrase, and I did this myself in about July of 2020, is called a passion pivot. And then basically, what are you passionate about? Where are you doing? The COVID blessing, as I like to say as well, is basically that some people have more time to be able to do that. They're not commuting. They're not going to the office on a regular basis. They're still getting the work done for their 9 to 5, whatever that may be. But they're also realizing that there may be something else that they can do that they're really passionate about. And that occurred for me, for instance, and at 61, not necessarily reinventing, but kind of rejiggering, if you will, where I am and what goes on. 62 in April of this year. But it's interesting to see. I've been doing, I do LinkedIn one-on-one training, as you know, but I'm also doing similar coaching for that you are doing in marketing and helping folks figure out, okay, how am I going to get out there and really let people know what I'm passionate about and being able to make it work. So fascinating to see how that all occurs. I've got a question for you, because I put out one of my favorite things to do. I put out a LinkedIn poll and this went out a couple of days ago, and it talked about retirement and whether or not it's something that people are paying attention to or not. And it's interesting to see the reaction that I got on this poll. 43% of the people that I polled about retirement said, retirement, what's that? Somewhere between 65 and 70 maybe, and only 17% said, I will retire at the normal age of 65. So are you seeing that in your clients? Are you seeing folks that are saying, for us, for instance, I'm not looking to retire. I will always do what I really enjoy doing and be passionate about that. But are you seeing that for yourself? Are you seeing that for your clients? What's retirement look like to the reinventors, if you will?
Yeah, I love the results. Very interesting, the results of your poll, Chuck. I, like you, don't plan to retire. I thought I would, but I'm having fun. I'm enjoying what I'm doing, and I'm going to just continue it. And we'll see what happens. As far as people that I work with, I'm finding that people are, well, as your poll indicated, people are working longer. They're not necessarily retiring when they thought that they would. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's by choice, other times it's not. And the people that are continuing to work are oftentimes feeling finding once they hit their groove, finding a kind of new sense of energy and spirit in terms of what they're doing.
Yeah, and I think you're probably finding this. I know I am, that there's a growing community of what I call uplifters. On every Friday, I put my uplifters out as to who's uplifted me during the week, and I always talk about, if you're running through depression, everybody's running through depression this year, no doubt about that. Best way to get out of that is to uplift somebody else. So there's a growing community of folks that. A couple of things are happening, and talk to me about this as well. Remote work, because I've been doing remote work off and on for 15 to 20 years. Remote work now is the norm as opposed to the unusual thing that you could do. And employers are still struggling with figuring out, okay, how does that all work with a remote workforce? I work with several different agencies that have 15 to 20 to 40 some odd remote people that they need to be in contact with on a regular basis. So, so it's interesting to see how COVID has affected that. But what do you see as far as the state of work, if you will, moving forward? With larger companies like Salesforce saying, remote will be the norm as opposed to something that's unusual. Are you seeing that trend?
Yes, a lot of the people I work with are either working with smaller companies or have their own business, so we're already working remotely. But I certainly have seen that with people, colleagues of mine that I talk to. If they're not on site, they may be working remotely 3 or 4 days a week, go into the office 1 day a week. So there's definitely a shift. And I think for the better. I think that we suddenly realize that, hey, we don't necessarily need to be in that office all the time, and we can be a lot more productive if we're not. And people have so many other duties, childcare, you're a caregiver for somebody, and it gives you flexibility.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So 50 plus, like I said, I'm 61. So I decide that, it's time for me to reinvent myself. I'll use your example. I'm a PR agency owner and I want to be a book author and coach. How do I know that I should be reinventing myself? I guess would be the first question. And then how do I go about doing that?
All excellent questions. As far as how you know when you should be doing it, most people don't wake up and say, gee, I think I'll reinvent myself today. It's a nagging, ongoing feeling that things are just not going quite right. You're just not as content as you would like to be. Something isn't working. And I know people that I interviewed for my book. I'm thinking of one gentleman in particular. He was extremely successful in his work he actually was a PR person and marketer. He had some major successes, but he just wasn't happy with what he was doing suddenly. Things had changed and he knew he had to do something else. So he actually, for himself, sought out a coach, and the coach suggested that he actually become a coach, which is what he does today. But I think you get that feeling inside yourself. Your gut starts telling you, hey, I can't keep doing this. I need to do something else. And it's not going to happen overnight, but you'll get more and more signs that you need to change. And then as far as you go about reinventing yourself, reinvention doesn't happen overnight. It's an ongoing process. In fact, I like to think that we're constantly, maybe not reinventing, but certainly we need to tweak what we're doing because the world changes so fast and we need to keep up as best we can. But as far as starting your own reinvention, with my book, I came up with 7 principles in order to reinvent yourself. And that includes everything from developing a growth mindset to having a willingness to learn, to actually plowing through being uncomfortable. Because when you're making a change, you're doing things that are not necessarily familiar to you, and you're not going to feel necessarily at home. You also need to find your purpose, storytelling, personal branding, and social media mentoring. Those are my 7 principles. And to begin, what's important is to really adopt the right mindset and be willing to make mistakes along the way. It's not necessarily a smooth path. You may have some zigs and zags, but you will get there. And what I talk about in my book is the difference between the growth mindset and the fixed mindset. And this is a terminology that's been popularized by the psychologist Carol Dweck. And a fixed mindset is when you're stuck. You believe that what you've been is what you are. You can't change. You have not limited, but you have certain talents and experiences. And you can't do anything to make it different. A growth mindset, on the other hand, imbues you with a sense of change, that you can grow, you can learn, that making a mistake is not the end of the world. And that, in turn, having that mindset gives you the force of mind to start your reinvention process.
Interesting to see how that all works out. We actually have one of my favorite people, Sue Cerna, is in listening, and she's got a question for you, Wendy. She says, I'm 42, not 50 quite yet, but I've had to reinvent my career at least twice. And I knew Sue originally when she was a reporter for the News and Observer in Raleigh. And she's reinvented her career at least twice. Do you think there's differences between forced reinvention, like I got laid off and I need to figure out what to do, versus voluntary or passion-driven reinvention that you initiate yourself? She's done one of each. As a matter of fact, she's one of the best social media security experts in the country, and she would like to know your perspectives in that regard. So the difference between being laid off and forced reinvention versus voluntary, passion-driven reinvention.
Thanks, Sue, for your question, and congratulations on reinventing yourself twice. As far as those 2 modes of reinvention, forced or passion, hopefully, eventually, the force will turn into a passion. So it'll give you the opportunity to find out what your passion is. So that I think that the process along the way is similar. Obviously, the beginning is different because the person that's forced, say they've been laid off from a job that they loved, they're going to go through that period of heartbreak, of depression, probably, of upset, till they get to that stage where they're ready to move on and reinvent. When you're doing it out of a passion, when you're not forced to, you don't necessarily have to stay in that doldrums stage for long. You're still going to have bumps along the way. It's not, as I said before, it's not necessarily smooth. Things that you anticipate may turn out differently. So the trajectory is not directly upward, but you'll be zigging and zagging. So I hope that answered your question.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And like I said, Sue's a great person, somebody you all should connect with to be able to talk to her as well. And I wanted to touch on your 7 principles, and one that kind of really stuck out to me, and for a very specific reason, but that is tapping into social media and mentorships. And as you know, with Pay It Forward Tuesdays, and we'll talk about that towards the end of the broadcast, but that's a lot of what we do as 6 different people with 30 minutes of mentorship for nonprofits or up and coming entrepreneurs. But talk to me about what does that look like? I mean, how do you go about finding, tapping into social media, and how do you find mentorships? I mean, that's something that I know people would be very interested. I get, requests on a regular basis to have conversations. I'm sure you do as well, but it kind of is a double-edged sword, right? Is how do you mentor and how do you find mentorships?
Now, let me address the social media one first, and then I'll
Okay.
to the mentorship. As far as social media goes, that has become really it's not new anymore, but it's really the way you network today.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be on social media. And you don't have to be on every social media channel. You need to find one where your tribe is, people that you relate to, that you admire are. So I, for example, am very active and love LinkedIn, and find that for my audience and my interests, that's a great place to be. And by being on social media, it gives you the opportunity to network, to meet people you would ordinarily not meet. In fact, you and I, Chuck, met on social media.
Absolutely.
And it opens up a whole new world for you. It's also a way to enunciate your personal brand, so that as you're growing, changing, reinventing, and you want people to know about it, you have the opportunity to share that, who you're all about, what you're doing on social media. So it gets people to know you, to engage with you, and want to know you better. And if you're looking for a job, there's nothing better than developing your own brand, getting people interested in what you're doing, and they'll want to reach out to you. So I can't stress being active on social media, as you know, enough.
Yeah, and I'm going to interrupt you for a second because I'm going to borrow the phrase. I think it's an amazing first time I've heard this, actually, enunciating your personal brand. I think that's an amazing phrase and
Oh,
something that people have to really embrace because it's very cool. So mentorships, how does that work? I mean, I'm getting ready to reinvent myself. Other than I'm going to definitely engage with Wendy Marx and do the Thriving at 50 Plus program. But how do I go about looking for mentorships?
when we talk about mentorship, I also want to make the point that you don't only need to think of it as finding your own mentor, but you can also be a mentor to others.
Hmm.
And oftentimes it becomes a good barter situation. For example, somebody 50 plus may need help with social media. They don't, or technology. They can mentor or reach out to a millennial who in turn can serve as their mentor. when it comes to that. But meanwhile, the millennial may need some help in navigating the business world, how to do interviews, and the 50 plus person could help with that. So that's one way to look at it. It's not, I need a mentor, but you can look at it as being a mentor as well as a mentee. In addition, to find one, people love to be, or at least a lot of people like to be helpful. And if you're thinking about going into a new field, it's helpful to reach out to people, either people that you've known well, or even people you peripherally know, or people that you know may be able to introduce you to somebody who can help you on this new journey. And that's really the way you find a mentor. It's by networking your way into the situation. Now, you may be privileged and know somebody off the bat who could serve as your mentor. And it's also important to think of mentoring and being a mentor and being a mentee. It's a two-way street. If you get a mentor, you don't want to be the one that's simply taking. You also want to give back to your mentor. You may have some skills that, and I'm sure you do, that could assist them and help them. So you need to look at it like any good relationship as a give and take.
Yeah, it's a great perspective on that regard. And I run across that, quite frankly. I mean, I consider myself a LinkedIn expert. I know a lot about the platform, and that's part of my business. But quite frankly, while I've seen TikTok, I will never be on it. And Instagram is not my favorite because I'm not a graphics person. But I've worked with not just millennials, but Zs. As a matter of fact, I'm working with a client right now in that regard. Who has a young Z who is she kills on Instagram and she kills on graphics, and so she's teaching me as I'm teaching her. And the other point, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, the other point on this is, when my kids were growing up, for instance, I always use the phrase, the only answer you're going to get is no if you don't ask the question first. So go and ask that question and make the shot. I mean, I know a lot of my friends / influencers are ones that who are accessible and can make a difference. So it really does help in that regard. So that's great, Wendy. We are, and this always happens. We are running close to time as far as things that I want to make sure I allow you to spend some time talking to people about, and one of them is, and we'll put this back up, is the thriving at 50plus.com, your website. Go take a look at that, the 7 principles, and kudos, by the way, one of the better websites as far as a coach goes, to be able to really understand exactly what you offer and the value that you bring. So that's really cool. But my understanding, and I'll let you take this, is that you have something for my listeners as well.
I do, Chuck. I have a special freebie for 5 of your listeners, the first 5 who email me, and I'll give them a week to get in touch with me. But the first 5 who email me at the address that Chuck has up here, and if somebody's just listening to the podcast, my email is Wendy with a Y at thriving at 50 numeral 50 plus plus.com. Wendy at thriving at 50plus.com. And what I'm offering these lucky first 5 people is a free personal branding session with me. And this will give you an opportunity to have a branding expert look at the way you have been branding yourself. If you haven't, it'll give you insight into what you can do. So please feel free to do that. I also wanted to mention that I have a helpful monthly newsletter. So when you do go up to my website, scroll down and you can subscribe to it. I'd love to hear from you.
That would be great.
And lastly, Chuck, I just want to put in a little plug, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you. For my upcoming show, as Chuck mentioned, Renewal at 50 plus, and it's going to be live on LinkedIn. And I'd love your listeners to follow me on LinkedIn and they can hear about it. My LinkedIn is linkedin.com/in, the standard LinkedIn, /Wendy, WENDY, as in Apple, Marx, MARX.
Great. I'm sure you're going to be flooded with requests for both the coaching, but also for the LinkedIn connections. Wendy Marx, I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this. As always, it's great to have conversations. And as we mentioned pre-show, I never script this, and frankly, those are the best conversations you can possibly have. So thank you, first of all, for giving back to a community that needs your help, and that's the 50 plus community, which I'm a part of. And even for the folks, your comment, I will leave you with this. The comment that you made in regards to, just because you're 50 plus doesn't mean you couldn't use a millennial/Z mentor to help you as well. It's a two-way street and it's a conversation. So thank you again for the time you spent with us today, Wendy. It's been truly a pleasure.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it, Chuck.
All right. Okay, so that's another edition of Conversations with Chuck Hester. As I always mention to my guests, this 30 minutes, 40 minutes goes by really quickly. So I do want to spend a couple of minutes talking about some of my passions and what's been going on, and that is the Pay It Forward Minute, where I'll highlight cool things in the Pay It Forward movement. As most of you know who are involved with this podcast, you know of the Pay It Forward Tuesdays initiative, and that is basically where we have 5 different consultants and experts in their field who give 30 minutes of consulting time each to either a charity or an up-and-coming entrepreneur. By the time we're done in 2021, we will have mentored 16 different organizations or people. Special shout out to the Pay It Forward 5, which is Adam Sinkus, Jennifer Radke, Bob Shears, and Brian Basilico. And we are accepting nominations for our March recipient right now. We'll be announcing that next Tuesday, March 17th on St. Patrick's Day. So if you have someone who you think would be a good nominee, then I will put this up for you, and that is to go to the payitforwardtuesdays.org website and nominate, or if you want to nominate yourself, we're fine with that as well. And most importantly, I think that, if you're a company or organization that provides products and services to the small business and entrepreneur community, we are looking for sponsors that can help. Whether it's products and services in kind for 2021 recipients or donations to our cause and what we've got going on. It's a great way to pay it forward and build brand equity in your community. So contact me for details and I can help out. Now, next week for you football fans, this is probably, and thanks to Aaron Houghton, who turned me on to this gentleman, but my guest is Benny Fowler. He's a member of the Super Bowl 50 champion Denver Broncos and now a New Orleans Saints wide receiver. And he's also a performance coach, and he uses brain mapping to help his clients succeed. And please feel free to share this podcast with your friends and connections. Replays will post very soon on Facebook and my YouTube channel and through Anchor FM, which is the audio of the podcast, which can then be found on Google Podcasts, Spotify, and many other channels. And my commercial, interested in learning how to improve your marketing and LinkedIn presence, connect with me on LinkedIn, mention this podcast, and you can receive a 15-minute discovery call. So that's it for this week. Until next time, this is Chuck Hester reminding you to stay well, stay connected, and always pay it forward.